Hi everyone, this is a new producer interview. I am so happy today because I am talking to Marsha Shandur. Hi Marsha, how's it going?
Hi. Okay, thank you. You know what? You were one of the first people to interview me who didn't ask how I pronounce my last name, and you got it right. And I think it's because Europeans, we know how to pronounce stuff. I mean, I'm English, so mostly we don't know how to pronounce stuff, but
And maybe I've met you before, but no one knows.
right.
So you are a storytelling speaker and communication coach. You have done so many amazing things. You've worked with hundreds of individuals and groups of executives, entrepreneurs, and professionals in Canada, the US, and the UK. You've presented keynotes at World Domination Summit, which is so badass, in Portland, and at Women's Executive Network events across Canada. And you're also, most importantly for us today, the host, organizer, and storytelling coach for True Stories Toronto, the city's largest storytelling show, which is now online, so everyone can attend. And I am very proud to be part of your team behind the scenes. Yeah, all right, so let's get this party started. I have so many questions for you because you have such a great insight into what goes on behind the scenes and how you find storytellers and so on. So let's start with what gets you to being a producer. How did that happen?
So one thing I find when you hear about someone being like, oh, the biggest show in the city, and like it didn't start like that. My very first show, the audience was 3 people, my friend Connie, my mum, and my best friend. But I did it, so I've discovered storytelling through, I became obsessed with the Moth podcast. I found it through This American Life podcast and was just like, oh my gosh, I love it. I'd worked with stand-up comedians for years and years and years when I used to be a radio DJ, but I worked with stand-ups a lot behind the scenes, and I had a book come out. I'm going to show it to camera because I happen to have it here, called Off the Mic, which was interviews with stand-up comedians. And my favorite stand-ups were always the ones that told stories, but I didn't know that performative storytelling was a thing. And I actually like wondered if I secretly wanted to be a stand-up, but I think I didn't. I did not. I tried it once, not good. But anyway, through my obsession with the Moth, I found a show I was living in the UK in London. I found a show called True Stories Told Live, and that had started up, and I went and told a story, and it was a story about my granny who died a few years before, and we were really close. And through telling the story, I felt like I got to spend time with her again. It was wild. And so when I moved they had a few like offshoot shows, and I think one in Cardiff and one in Brighton. And so I asked them if I could start up one here. And I knew there were a few other storytelling shows, but I felt like there wasn't one that quite did the same thing, the same format, where we would have a musician that tells a story about a song and then plays the song, and also that it starts early and ends early, which I really like going to bed early, so that appealed to me.
Yeah.
And so I had run events in the past, back in my life as a radio DJ, I'd run a lot of music events, and it was so stressful and awful. And so this time I thought, I'm going to choose a venue that is small enough that even if it's just me and the 5 storytellers, that is enough of an audience. And as I've suggested, it's very lucky that I did, because almost no one came, but it was a tiny, tiny cafe. And so I started there, this cafe called The Common on College in West Toronto. And then I ran it every 2 months because I was so new to Toronto that I just didn't have enough friends to populate the show every month. But then it just started to kind of grow and grow. And then we were just too big for that venue. And I emailed another venue just kind of on a whim. And the guy offered the venue to me for free. And he said, if you can bring 100 people. And I lied and said I could bring 50, thinking if 20 turn up, I'll be lucky. Yeah. And 150 people came. And it just was a bit of an if you build it, he will come moment. And then they sort of consistently have ever since. Yeah, now we're doing the show online and it's this totally different, but like actually also totally magical experience, which surprised me very much. How it's not that the intimacy was lost, it's just that it changed format.
Yeah, yeah. So how long have you been running the show in Toronto?
It's been 7 years. It was 2013 when I started.
Cool. Yeah. And side question, so when did you arrive in Toronto? Was that around the same time? Or?
No, it was, 2 years before that.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's nearly 8 years, and I'm nearly having my 10-year Canadiversary.
No.
It took me a really long time to make friends. Just
I'm so interested in knowing that story, just as a fellow immigrant. I love that you talk about starting small. You know, there's no pressure at the beginning. You want to start with the first small step. And also for people who want to start their own storytelling show, maybe online, now that it's a thing, they don't have to find a small venue because it's less, it doesn't show if there's few people. It's just, you know.
Yes, and I would say one more thing with the venue is like, when we moved to the big venue, at first we were packing it out, and then my girlfriend had a baby and I got very bad at promotion, and we were having these shows that were so empty, and then I realized it's because I was putting out chairs for an audience of 150, but 80 were showing up. So when I stopped putting so many chairs out, we kept having sellout shows. So that's the other thing, is like, don't, you know, even if you're doing it on Zoom, don't be like giant show, 100 people will be there, but just be like small intimate show, and then if it's big, you're like, yes, still intimate.
Love that. Okay, so then maybe how do you find storytellers?
So at the beginning, I would seek people out. I'd done a year of improv at Second City, and so a lot of them were people I'd done improv with, and I just sort of had a sense of who I thought would be good. And then I made, so after the first show, I sat down to coach all of the storytellers, partly because we had someone at the show who'd said that they were very experienced, and then they had a great story, but they just didn't tell it that well, and so I wanted to sit down with them. And for the first show, because I had a couple of people that I just thought would be good but had never done anything like this, I had sat down with them, and I was sort of really guessing at what I was doing. And so anyway, and so I think because of that, I make a really big deal at my show of saying, look, this is a great show to do if you've never done this before. I will sit down with you. The audience are always really nice. But also every time I met anyone that I thought would be any good, I'd be like, oh my gosh, you should come tell a story at my show. And then what happened because of that, and because the show's only every 2 months, is I started getting this 2-year waiting list. And then when you have a waiting list, everyone's like, wow, this show is popular, I better get on the waiting list. So it sort of becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. But so, yeah, mostly it was like reaching out. At the beginning, it was a lot of reaching out to people and asking them. And generally people are pretty into the idea. But I think also often people think, oh, I could never do that. So I think making a big deal of, first of all, talking about how amazing it is. Now, when I do the live shows, I say by round of applause, who's ever told a story at a storytelling show? And a few people, and I'll go, it's the best, isn't it? And everyone's like, yeah, because it is such a magical experience. And so I think it's like raving about it both on and off stage, or like whatever this is, stage, virtual stage.
And so for people who don't know much about live storytelling, what kind of stories do you go for, or do you look for?
So I'm always looking for the small story within the big story. People often come with these kind of sprawling epics, but really, so one of the things when I teach storytelling, a line I got from my friend Sage Turtle, who's my storytelling teacher, is that when you're telling a story, you're making a movie inside someone's brain. Which is a great line, and from that I extrapolate that most movies are in action scenes, not voiceover. Like most movies, you don't come into the theatre and there's Will Smith being like, there's a car chase, then this thing happened, then a bear came in, then I hit someone. Like you're watching the scenes play out, and so it's the same in the stories. And I think there's certain things that make a good story, like a transition, you know, I was this, then this happened, then I was this, or this was this, then this happened, then it was this. A relationship, but it could be like your relationship to the concept of turning up on time to things. Any kind of sensory, you know, very vivid sensory experiences. But really, whenever I sit down with storytellers, I always say to them, what's the one that's bursting out of you? Because usually that's going to be the best story. Even if sometimes you're like, I don't know how I would tell this as a story. And the one exception I would give to that rule is that the storyteller has to have emotional distance from it. If there's still a charge for them when they talk about it, even just to you, then they're not quite ready to tell it yet, because the audience won't feel safe. You can be moved by your own story, but you have to know when you're talking about it to me or to your friends, you have to be okay.
Perfect. All right. Next, I'm sure people would love to know how, like, specifically how you workshop stories. Give us the key points. Yeah, because we think we can tell stories naturally, but actually, like, it's things to know or things to look for. But I'll let you talk about that.
So my way is very intensive. I sit down with people, and this is kind of one of the rules for telling a story at my show, is that you're willing to sit down and do this. I sit down with people and we spend usually between 1 and 3 hours together. And I just say to them, well, actually nowadays I say the whole thing about the action scenes, and I talk about how, you know, I have this whole thing where I talk about the difference between, you know, a voiceover and a montage and an action scene, and how voiceover is kind of the narrative, this, then this, then this, and commentary. And the reason I do that first is because I say in a 10-ish minute story, and I'm not actually super strict on time in my show, but in a 10-ish minute story, you're kind of looking at like 1 to 4 action scenes. And so the reason I say that is because I explain to them, we're pulling the, like, what are the action scenes that are going to be in the story. I think one way to do it, I actually don't do this because I just kind of whatever spend hours. I'm now, as I'm talking, I'm like, this would be helpful. But one thing is to think, like, what is the point you're trying to get across? And I don't mean like, what is the like message that you need to like give to, I mean more like, is the point whenever I go to Costco with my mum, she spends loads of money, in which case that's going to help you edit, because you're like, well, did you need the scene where, you know, they came in someone in a cheerleader costume came in and did a backflip to collect money for charity? Like, that was fun, but you don't need it to get your point across, so maybe that goes. But that's kind of what I'm thinking. But actually, usually, honestly, I just follow my curiosity. And then the questions I ask are, what happened next, and what happened next, and how did you feel? And what happened next, and what happened next, and how did you feel? And I'm always trying to put myself in the audience's seat, to be like, what would this make sense to them? Like, what do they need to know in order? Because often when we're telling a story, we kind of assume everybody has the knowledge we have. And so you might say, you know, of course I wore green socks at that point. I might be like, but I don't know anything about baseball, so why would you, you know, whatever it is, like, why would you wear green socks? And so then you get them to explain those things. But the most important is the how did you feel? How did you feel? How did you feel? And all of my, like, most people hate that question, but that's the part that makes us care about the story. Because if you tell a story about crashing your car into your neighbor's fence, I don't really know what that means, but if you say, I crashed my car into my neighbor's fence and I was terrified, then I'm like, ooh, partly because I'm curious now, why are you terrified? But I also know this is a high stakes story. But if you say, I crashed my car into my neighbor's fence and I thought, what are you going to do? And I got up, then it's harder for me to invest in that story. Or similarly, sometimes someone will want to start with the like inciting incident and explain that for them it was very devastating or very, you know, exciting, but we kind of need that build up. I've seen storytellers on stage, not my show, but I remember once at a conference, two different speakers over the same weekend told a story that was devastating about somebody very close to them dying very suddenly, but they hadn't actually talked about their relationship with that person at all in advance. And so it was really hard for us in the audience to care, because we didn't know that person existed until the moment they died. And so, and I'm not saying that you should like give a soliloquy about how important that person is, but you can just, you know, another thing I learned from Sage Turtle is show, don't tell. So you can just describe a very intimate incident between the two of you, and then you'll be like, oh, you and that person are intimate, so that when something happens to them, then they'll be like, oh no, the person you're intimate with, something happened to them.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And so for people who...
Oh wait, sorry, I forgot something. Can I add something? So what I'll do is I think by writing notes. So I'll just take notes the whole time. And as I've done this got more and more practice, A, my shorthand has got better, but B, I start in the moment to see, okay, well, we don't need that bit and we do need this bit. And then at the end, I will give them a suggested story structure. And honestly, at the beginning, I was just guessing. I was like, I think this would make a good story. And then, you know, with anything, the more you do it, the better you get. And you start to just have like natural skill when you're doing it. And then I get them to go off and practice. And usually I just leave it at that. But sometimes I say, if you want to send it to me, but I tell them to practice it out loud. That one's really important, is practice it out loud. To an empty room is fine.
Yeah.
And often when I'm giving them the story structure, I get them to record me, because so that they'll actually hear, you know, and people, you know, will take that and often make it completely their own, and not, sometimes people just kind of follow pretty much the structure I've given them. Like I tell them to say it in their words, obviously, and usually I'm just regurgitating things that they have said to me. But sometimes people just do like amazing things with it, and it's so great. And of course, sometimes people tell stories and I'm like, I did tell you to do it a different way.
Okay,
what I suggested would have been better for this one.
Yeah, so between that and the show, you don't have a thing where they send the story back to you?
I mean, my show I run, this show I run, I mean, kind of technically at a loss for how many hours I put into it. Like the online show, I make a tiny bit of money every month. My live show, for reasons too boring and complicated to go into, I don't make money from. Like I lose a bit of money on that. And I just have limited capacity, so I don't always have time to do that. But I also kind of like to do that when I can, because I want the stories to be the best they can. But some people are also kind of resistant to it, in which case I'm like, that's cool. And I always say to them at the end of the coaching, I always say, look, this is all suggestion. As long as you're not causing harm to anyone in my audience by saying anything that's gonna, you know, that's whatever, racist or fatphobic or ableist. As long as you're not causing harm, you can say whatever you like. And I always say, you know, I have a really bad memory, and so I'm going to forget everything I've said. So I'm not going to be down the back of the audience being like, actually, that's not what we discussed. You put it a different way. But so I give them that, but I don't think that you have to say that. I think you can say to them, like, this is my storytelling show. And I have had 2 people in the past very resistant. And one of them actually who said, we had this very like amicable thing, but she said, I feel like you're trying to get me to tell my story your way. And I actually was. I mean, I just thought it was better than the way she was.
Yeah.
And so, which is kind of arrogant, but she was like, I didn't, you know, and so that's totally fair. And that's why, and to be fair, she was someone who I had approached. She wasn't someone and so now that I'm at the point where people are applying to me, they know that that's part of the process, that we'll sit down. And for experienced storytellers, I think it's like a fun experience to workshop the story.
Definitely. Cool. Okay. And so I have one last question, but before we get on that last question, for people who are interested in being storytelling show producers themselves and who are maybe going to be part of my super intimate program to learn how to create your own storytelling show online, we are going to have a super special bonus where you, Marsha, go into detail about that whole process of workshopping stories and getting the most out of people's life stories.
And I love that you're doing that course, and I love that part of that course, I just learned this today, is that they're actually going to do the show during the course, because I've done so many courses where I'm like, what great theory, and then I do nothing with it. And so it's I love that I just think that like the more people who are producing storytelling shows, the more they will be in the world. There's still so many people who have no idea this is a thing. And at my show I have so many people who've never been to a storytelling show, and their minds are blown, and it's so powerful. I love it. So I love what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Same vibe, same you know, wavelength, whatever. Okay, so your show is now online. How is it moving from brick and mortar to online? I lost you. No, you're frozen. I think this is you now, or frozen. Oh, okay. Oh, there you are. Okay, great. So, okay, I can see you.
Oh yeah, okay. Now it's saying it's me. Sorry.
That's all right. So okay. How was it moving online with your show?
So we had a show booked, and it was just as lockdown hit, and I was emailing with the wonderful booker at the Garrison, our venue, saying like, do you know what's going to happen? And so then I had to call it and put it online, and it was, I had no idea how this was going to be. I'm lucky that I'd done a lot of stuff online, but I hadn't ever done an event, and it was amazing. And it was what I didn't expect. I mean, okay, so in terms of bad things first is like, you don't have the audience sound. I tried doing a thing where I had like me and the other storytellers unmuted, but it would just be weird because someone would tell a joke and you'd know there were 100 people watching, and then like there would be 3 people going, ha ha ha. And so in the end I decided to just mute everyone. But there's this powerful intimacy that I wasn't expecting, because yes, you don't have the energy of physical people in the room, but usually the audience is just this kind of blob in the dark. And actually now the audience were like face to face. So maybe about a third of the people had their cameras on. And you're looking, and not only that, they were in their living rooms, and this was right in lockdown. So it's like they're in their living rooms that they're trapped in. And I remember there was a couple who their kid came and like wrapped in a blanket, sat with them for a little while, and it was so moving. And you get to see their reactions close up. And it felt like this very, at this point where we were all suddenly so disconnected, it felt like a very connective thing. And one of my storytellers, Rachel Cardiello, when she came on, said, I miss looking at strangers. I miss looking at strangers for more than 3 seconds as I walk past them. I used to go sit in coffee shops and look at strangers. And so it's been amazing to just sit and look at strangers. And so it's really, and then the other thing is that, you know, I discourage heckling very much at the storytelling shows, but people are writing in the chat. And so not only are they going, lol, so funny, but also people are saying, oh, so moving, or that happened to me too. And so after each storytelling show, I screenshot the chat and send it to the storytellers. It's really, that's like a really lovely thing. And then also having people all over the world. And I've tried to still keep it mostly Toronto storytellers, not least because there's the Toronto's in the name, True Stories Told Live Toronto. But I did have someone, a friend from Chicago, who I had just always really wanted to have on the show. And so I'm kind of using this guy, Jeff Harry. But so I'm kind of using that also as a way to be like, oh my gosh, I can have other people. And I think once lockdown ends, I need to, you know, if I have the capacity to do it, I want to keep doing the shows online as well as in person, because they just feel like a different creature. And I love it.
Yeah, and it's the creature that I started with, and I'm not doing the other creature, and I'm never doing. I think just because I'm an introvert, I don't know, or maybe one time I will do it, but yeah, it's nice to have it monthly and to keep it going. So, do you have a show in September 2020?
Yes, I do. I have a show on, I should know, I think it's September the 29th. I'm going to look it up right now. So it's, the show generally is on the last Tuesday of the month, every other month. So we have a show on September the 29th. Correct. Thank you, Past Marsha. And then actually we have an extra show on October the 27th, which is our Ghost Stories show, where people come and tell true and not true ghost stories. And we usually do a sing-along a Ghostbusters theme tune if we're doing it on Zoom. I don't know how that's going to work, but maybe we'll try it anyway. Yeah.
Ooh, you're muted. Yeah, okay, great. So everyone go watch Marsha's show on September 29th and October 27th, 2020. People can follow you on Facebook at True Stories Told Live Toronto. No.
Yeah, that's right. If you just type True Stories Toronto into Facebook, then our group will show up and you can find out more in there. Or I have, I'm sorry about the extra vocal backup singer you can hear. I also, if you go to yesyesmarsha.com/true stories, then you can sign up to hear about future shows and you can watch 3 of the past shows.
Awesome. Great. Let's see. Yes, and so for people who are interested in being a producer themselves, I so highly recommend it. It has changed my life, and I'm sure it has changed yours. And so, yeah, I have a program for true storytelling nerds who are ready to step into their producer craft and to find their crowd and to just work with dream storytellers. And so just follow Bodies of Stories, at Bodies of Stories on Instagram and Facebook. And any last word, Marsha? Thank you so much for today.
Just that I think that storytelling is the way that we change the world. I mean, if you think about anything you remember from history, it's probably a little story. And it grows empathy because our brains respond as if the story is happening to us. And so the more we can tell stories, the better. And the more we can have storytelling shows where people are able to tell stories, then, you know, the more platforms there are, the more likely that is to happen. And so go make a show. And let Brune help you.
Do it. You can find Marsha Shandur at Yes Yes Marsha on social media and yesyesmarsha.com. And thank you so much for watching. Stay in touch and talk to you soon. Bye, Marsha.